Senator Urquhart.
Deputy President. Understanding Order 74.5a, I seek an explanation from the Minister for Communications, who is represented by Senator Hume in this chamber, as to why portfolio questions numbered 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, 307, 309, 311, 312, 318, 321, 323, 325, 326, 328, 330, 331, 332, 333, 334, 335, 336, 337, 338, 339, 340, 341, 342 and 344, which I placed on notice on the 17th of November 2020, remains unanswered.
That's a lot of questions, Senator Urquhart. Minister.
Thank you, and I thank the senator for her statement. I won't ask you to repeat those numbers. I didn't write them all down. I am advised that the questions on notice from Budget Estimates 2020-21 that are being sought were asked of the National Broadband Network Corporation, NBN Co. Now, I understand that the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications have repeatedly encouraged NBN Co to provide those responses in a timely manner. I will contact the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts in relation to these questions.
Senator Urquhart.
Deputy President, under Standing Order 74.5b, I move that the Senate take note of the explanation. Now, let us be based on the evidence we have received from the committee, the overwhelming majority of these questions, as the Minister is aware, as she just outlined, to NBN Co were due on the 21st of December 2020. Today is the 16th of February 2021. This means that the questions outlined are now 58 days overdue and counting, which is simply unacceptable. And I understand that there are a number of other questions which other senators have placed on notice in the Senate to NBN Co and which are also overdue, significantly overdue. This lack of responsiveness reflects very poorly on the Minister for Communications and very poorly on NBN Co. More broadly, it underscores a lack of respect for Senate accountability, which has plagued the communications portfolio throughout the parliamentary term of this government. Labor calls on the Morrison government and NBN Co to release these questions immediately and stop disrespecting the intelligence of Australian taxpayers. The majority of the questions on notice go directly to the economics of the NBN and financial metrics underpinning the 2021 NBN corporate plan. They go to the issues such as debt, cash flows, cost per premises, operating costs, capital expenditures, bonuses and a range of other information that allow the parliament, the media and the Australian public better understand what was happening with our public money. In fact, much of this information was consistently published in previous corporate plans. But this year, the government decided to withhold this information because they did not want the media or the parliament to have visibility of its latest cost blowouts. It's another smokescreen. It's another cover-up. So today the Senate seeks an answer to that question. What exactly is the Morrison government trying to hide by not answering these questions and allowing them to be answered? What we know is that the release of NBN Co's corporate plan was delayed this year. It's normally released on the 31st of August, but this year, it's been delayed, but it was withheld until the 23rd of September. So notably, it was withheld until the afternoon after Minister Fletcher had announced the government's embarrassing copper backflip at the National Press Club. And then when the corporate plan came out later that afternoon, it immediately became clear that key information published in previous corporate plans had been omitted. So laughable were the redactions that the revised cost of the NBN, $57 billion, was not mentioned anywhere in the document.
Shame.
In terms of the information sought by the questions on notice, we know this information is held with the Chief Financial Officer and could have been provided to the Senate in December. We know that NBN Co's Corporate Affairs Division is among the best resourced corporate affairs division in the country, if not the best resourced. We also know that the delay of these responses is not an accident. It's intentional. It's clear that the intent was to withhold this information. NBN Co and the government have gone to great lengths to prevent the Chief Financial Officer of NBN Co from appearing before the Senate and other parliamentary committees. The one time the Chief Financial Officer was forced to appear under the threat of a Senate order, the Chief Executive Officer of NBN Co wouldn't allow him to open his mouth and respond to any question of substance. It was the most curious form of witness protection. There is a very simple reason that the Minister for Communications is seeking to delay the release of this information. This government's inferior NBN has not been faster and it has not been cheaper. On every measure, this technological debacle is slower, is less reliable and is more expensive. Let it be lost on nobody that in 2013 the Liberals, standing alongside a hologram of Sonny Bill Williams at Fox Studios, promised their second-rate version of the NBN would be delivered for $29.5 billion. Then it blew out in 2014 to $41 billion. Then it blew out again to $49 billion in 2015. Then it increased to $51 billion in 2018. By late 2020, it had surged again to a forecast of $57 billion. What a shame that the technology hadn't surged as fast. Worse still, the government even tried to cover this figure up and have their public officials invent a new accounting methodology to talk about the costs of NBN. It took less than 90 days from when the rollout was supposed to be complete for the government to begin desperately backflipping towards fibre, imposing greater cost and time on consumers and taxpayers. If you want the Oxford definition of incompetence and waste, look no further than the Liberals and this hapless Minister for Communications and their technological omelette known as the NBN multi-technology mix. The Liberals promised every Australian would have access to minimum speeds of 25 megabits per second by 2016. We are now in 2021, 5 years on, and these minimum speeds are not being delivered still over the copper NBN network. According to reports, up to 238,000 households still cannot access minimum speeds which are actually a requirement of both Australian law and the NBN Statement of Expectations. The Liberal Party, yes, I'm referring to the same Liberal Party who are on track to amass a $1 trillion in debt, has used taxpayer money to purchase over 49,000 kilometres of new copper for the NBN. That's enough copper to wrap around planet Earth and there's some then left over. Labor has even heard that the government maxed out the copper supply in Australia and had to start importing copper from Turkey and Brazil. If you're a global copper trader, the Morrison government is your best friend. And who can forget when Malcolm Turnbull, the then Prime Minister and now Minister Fletcher, hailed HFC technology as the great game changer. Madam Acting Deputy President, it most certainly did change the game, but for all the wrong reasons. Never has the rollout of network technology in Australia been more of a shambles. The NBN HCF rollout is the most uneconomical and arguable the most unreliable in the world. There is a good reason former NBN Co CEO Bill Morrow wanted to toss the entire HFC footprint in the bin. There's good reason that Mike Quigley and his management team also rejected the use of HFC under Labor. After talking it up as the best thing since sliced bread, the Liberals had to scrap the Optus HFC network because it was not fit for purpose. A humiliation. Then they had to pause the rollout of the remaining HFC network in November 2017 because the technology was so unreliable. Turning on your vacuum cleaner was enough to cause your internet to drop out. And just last fortnight, we found out that NBN Co will pause activations on the HFC network because they have run out of the chips for their modems. What a hot mess. No wonder Lontel, a Tasmanian ISP provider, recently wrote a blog referring to HFC as a dog's breakfast and singling it out as the most unreliable technology on the NBN network. Remember, this was the stuff that the previous Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, hailed as a game changer. It is quoted as a Tasmanian ISP as saying it's the most unreliable technology on the NBN network. So this brings me to the performance of the NBN during lightning storms. We've been hearing reports from the Blue Mountains, the Hawkesbury regions, parts of Greater Sydney and outer Melbourne, that fibre-to-the-curb modems on the NBN have been literally getting fried during lightning storms, with some households requiring up to 6 modem replacements, with technicians having to visit each time. Not very efficient. There's been an unacceptable lack of transparency on this issue, but from what we understand, lightning is causing a voltage surge down the copper line and into the modem. The Liberals had one job, and that was not to stuff up fibre-to-the-curb like they stuffed up everything else. This entails ensuring that the electronics and vendor equipment used to deliver the service were fit for purpose and had adequate surge protections. If storms are capable of blowing up 6 consecutive NBN modems, then something is not right. When political parties are incapable of taking a long-term view and consistently put politics ahead of the public interest, it invariably extracts a heavy price. Australians have paid more and gotten a worse NBN. And no matter how much spin the Liberals churn out, that is the stark reality. This build-a-dud and black flip-it-later approach means NBN Co is now borrowing billions more to construct a fibre network that will run in parallel with the existing copper network. Critically, despite new cost blowouts and rhetoric about upgrades, the government has currently only budgeted for 1 in 10 households in the copper footprint, 400,000 premises, to receive a fibre lead-in between now and 2024. On top of this, the full copper network will have to be operated and maintained, while the fibre network constructed in parallel goes underutilised. Remember, that's that copper that wraps around the planet and there's some left over. A lot of that's going to be now underutilised. You would, in all sincerity, be hard-pressed to think up a more illogical and costly way to deploy a national broadband network with public money. After $51 billion, the purchase of 50,000 kilometres of new copper and a decade of ridiculing fibre, not only has this government forfeited its credibility, but they have done so without explaining what the real cost of their capitulation is. This black flip is not simply a vindication of Labor policy, but an affirmation of something more fundamental. The Liberals get the big calls wrong. And to sum all this up, we have a minister and a public company which has spent $57 billion of taxpayers' money disrespecting the Senate and seeking to evade security and scrutiny. We have a copper network that is so defunct it still cannot deliver minimum speeds to up to 238,000 premises. We have a HCF network that is arguably one of the biggest and most expensive telecommunication debacles in the world. We have modems literally frying because of lightning surges down copper leading cables. Evidently, the decision in 2013 to dump fibre has resulted in a colossal waste of time and money. Do it once, do it right, do it with fibre. Had the Liberals simply followed this path, Australians would have a faster and more reliable network at far less cost to the taxpayer. Little wonder we have a dud NBN at a cost now forecast to reach $57 billion, nearly $30 billion over budget, ranked 61 globally for speeds and a rollout schedule running more than 4 years behind what the Liberals originally promised. They said they could do it better, they said they could do it cheaper, and they haven't delivered on any of that. Madam Deputy President, it's no wonder that this government is trying to evade scrutiny. It is really no wonder at all. And I would call on the government to ensure that they hold NBN to account and that they provide the answers to these questions and that they provide an open and transparent process through the Senate processes, estimates and other areas, and they should be scrutinised.
Senator Urquhart, your time has expired. Senator Kitching.
Thank you, Deputy President. Under Standing Order 74, subsection 5, subsection A, I rise to speak on the explanation sought by my colleague and friend, Senator Urquhart, of the Minister for Communications, represented by Senator Hume in this chamber. I won't read through the numbers of the questions on notice. With encouragement from Senator Urquhart, I will. 301, 302, 303, 304, 305. Good news, they managed to answer 306. 307 also managed to answer 308. 309 is unanswered. 311, 312, 318, 321, 323.
Senator Kitchen, just resume your seat for a moment. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. These have already been read into Hansard. I would raise tedious repetition.
There's no point of order. Thank you, Senator Brockman. Senator Kitching.
We continue. Thank you, Deputy President. So I think I got up to 318, 321, 323, 325, 326, 328, 330, 331, 332, 333, 334, 335, 336, 337, 338, 339, 340, 341, 342 and 344. And of course that isn't tedious repetition, as was suggested by Senator Brockman. It's actually just embarrassing for the government that they have an agency that thinks that they are above the standing orders of this chamber, and that is actually the problem. So no one on the other side wanted to actually hear all of those numbers of the questions outstanding. So who does the NBN think they are? Because remember, committee members were told informally that they wouldn't get any answers until the end of January. So in this blithe, non-acceptance of the Senate standing orders, the NBN decided that they would set their own timetable. So anyway, we'll get to more of their outrageous antics later on. Clause 74 of the Senate standing orders provides that a minister has 30 days in which to provide an answer to a question. As at midday today, the 16th of February 2021, also my birthday, Deputy President, there are 118 overdue questions on notice lodged via the table office the oldest being 62 days overdue. There are 345 questions on notice which have been taken by the communications portfolio in the 2020-2021 budget estimates. The committee set the following due dates for questions on notice: 3 December 2020 for the initial hearing and 21 December for the spillover hearing. 239 questions were taken on notice during and post the initial estimates hearing. Only 59 were returned to the committee on time and 180 were or are overdue, that being 75% of the questions, and 32 still have not been answered. 106 questions were taken on notice during and post the spillover estimates hearing. Only 9 were returned to the committee on time. 97 were or are overdue, that being 91% of the questions are overdue, and 49 still haven't been answered. What this actually shows is a clear pattern of disrespect and lack of transparency and accountability by the Minister for Communications, Minister Fletcher, and his representing minister in this place. There are 2 particular agencies that are among the most egregious in their constant and continued attempts to withhold information sought by me through the question on notice process. And I do not say this lightly. With the exception of the Department of Parliamentary Services, whose constant evasions and obfuscations are masterly, and that is a bit of an understatement, both the National Broadband Network Co and Australia Post are perhaps the worst I have ever seen. As someone who has entered many questions on notice, over 11,000, in the life of this parliament alone, I do not say this lightly. I must preface this by making the point that this is in no way a slight on the hard-working men and women in these organisations. Remember, it was the party to which I belong, the Australian Labor Party, and our union affiliates, who saw off an attempt by this government and the former CEO of Australia Post to sack a quarter of our nation's posties under the cover of the coronavirus pandemic. It was also the grand vision of my predecessor in this place, Senator Conroy, that realised a national broadband network. That was to give all Australians a world-class access to the internet, and we've heard from Senator Urquhart some of the problems with that. We on this side stand up for those workers every day. What we don't stand up for are senior executives at public sector government business enterprises who remember, they take no corporate risk. They are remunerated extremely well. They stonewall questions put to them by the nation's parliament on behalf of the people of Australia, just like they were company directors at an annual meeting avoiding the scrutiny of their shareholders. Let me start with the NBN and their senior executives and their board. The NBN is an organisation which I discovered through a question on notice which they actually answered, mind you. It has 13 employees earning over $500,001, 21 employees earning between $400,001 and $500,000, 110 employees earning between $300,001 and $400,000, and 733 employees earning between $200,001 and $300,000. Their conspiracy of silence is a disgrace. They do not get to choose to keep secrets from the taxpayer and the parliament. It is disrespectful to the people who are paying their large salaries, the same people who will be paying the bills racked up by this organisation for a long time, and no doubt their children and their children's children will also be still paying these bills. They are the same Australians who put us here and who expect us to do our job, and part of that job is to keep the government accountable and to ensure that there is scrutiny on government departments and agencies. Labor has even heard that the government maxed out the copper supply in Australia and had to start importing copper from Turkey and Brazil. But let me read you some of the questions on notice that are outstanding in relation to the NBN. How many executives received an increase to their base salary in the 2019-2020 financial year? In each of the 2018 to 2019 and 2019-2020 financial years and the 2020-21 financial year to date, has NBN engaged, employed or hired the services of a media personality? If so, who was engaged, employed or hired, for what purpose and at what cost? please produce a copy of the Register of Declarations of Interest as at 1 December 2020. So you might, let's just take that last question. You might think that that was a fairly easy question to answer. If you're an organised entity and you know your documents are organised, you should be able to produce that quickly. But no, we're still waiting for that one. NBN Co and the government have gone to great lengths to prevent their Chief Financial Officer from appearing before the Senate and other parliamentary committees. The one time the Chief Financial Officer was forced to appear under the threat of a Senate order, the Chief Executive Officer of NBN Co wouldn't allow him to open his mouth and respond to any of my questions that were being put to him. It was a total joke. I also had to insist that the legal counsel of NBN Co come to estimates because, not surprisingly, you have to put in FOIs in order to get NBN Co to actually respond to anything, and they haven't responded to the FOIs either, so we shouldn't get our hopes up. It was a strange performance. The Chief Financial Officer was more reminiscent of a hostage than a senior public executive fronting up to answer questions about the expenditure of public monies. It's a little like the end of the film Thelma and Louise. The NBN Co CEO is sort of Louise driving off the cliff with the unaccountable minister being his Thelma at the wheel. And as for the performance of NBN Co executives at estimates, it is a masterclass in obfuscation and how not to answer a question. These fat cats at NBN can run, but they will not be able to hide. It is just a matter of time and how poorly they want to look in the meantime before this parliament will get the answers to the questions we seek. At some point, they are going to have to answer what are pretty basic and easy questions to answer. But maybe we can't assume that their records are in any state that is fit for an entity of that size, and they can't actually access anything because there is no excuse for their inability to not be able to produce those documents. They spend a fortune on PR gurus who usually defend such upstanding corporate citizens as James Hardie. That's that's Australia Post, where they've employed Ross Thornton there, and actually can't seem to locate how many hours he has put in there. So that's another lot of questions on notice that we have to another agency, another government-owned business that is being, is answerable supposedly to Minister Fletcher. So I just want to go through some of this. So they've employed a PR guru there. He's worked for James Hardie, AMP, who during the Banking Royal Commission, let us not forget, were found to be charging fees to dead people. And if you look to the board of Australia Post, which is full of people connected who have Liberal Party connections, and they are now on what is a pretty prestigious board, the Australia Post board. So what we've heard, even well before we had Cartier watches being purchased for already well-remunerated executives, we heard extraordinary stories of the former CEO, Ms Holgate, racking up hundreds of thousands on the corporate credit card, spending eye-watering amounts of fresh floral arrangements and plants for the office at a time when everyone was working from home. So they were putting these floral arrangements into the offices when no one was there, and the board was trying to approve exorbitant bonuses for themselves. The spectacle of one pampered poodle after another defending the right of a multi-million-dollar salaried public servant using public money to buy luxury watches as personal gifts for favoured staff is one that defies credulity. But perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. In some ways, I think the NBN situation is actually worse than anything Christine Holgate did. Ms Holgate shows a reflection of a fundamental misunderstanding of her role, her duties and her obligations as a public sector CEO. The Cartier watches, the floral arrangements, the bonuses they tried to approve for the executive team at nearly around about $1 million each. And of course, there she was asserting that Australia Post money is not taxpayer money. Of course, Australia Post is very much a government-owned organisation, and it actually belongs to all of us. We all use it. It is a part of every Australian's life. Her answers revealed a very unhealthy culture that I feared explained much about the profligate spending culture at Australia Post that the hundreds of questions on notice exposed. Let me now read you some questions on notice that are outstanding in relation to Australia Post. Please provide Australia Post board documents, including but not limited to board meeting agendas, board papers and board meeting minutes created between October 2018 to December 2018. So remember, that's October 2018 to December 2018, which reference or relate to rewards, gifts or bonuses for any Australia Post employee, manager or executive. So we've got October, November, December, and they still can't find those. There's this exchange between myself and the then Australia Post CFO and now acting CEO, Rodney Boys, and also apparently likely to become the CEO, from an estimate spillover session. Mr Boys, do you think you will be able to respond to my question on notice fully in terms of a breakdown of the expenditure on the Office of the CEO credit card? You said you could not answer because everyone was working at home from coronavirus. We had a brief discussion at last estimates and you said we could not answer that because people are working at home, and we had a discussion about whether you did any online banking. So remember, this is the CFO of Australia Post, and whether you were able to do banking when you weren't in the office. Are you going to be able to answer that question on notice properly and give us a breakdown of the expenditure? You won't be surprised to learn that we have yet to receive this information either. A large proportion of the answers that we seek here today, Deputy President, relate to the NBN's extraordinary entertainment spend, which the Morrison government refuses to provide automated reports from accounting software. So I've asked for a breakdown of $874,000 in a financial year. Apparently they are not able to break down that figure. NBN's aggregate of bonuses paid to its executives, whether or not NBN increased staff salaries during the APS pay freeze, NBN's internal FOI procedures, given the numerous FOIs lodged by me that have been resisted, requests for copies of Australia Post board documents, and breakdowns of executive-issued credit cards. But in actual fact today, the Senate seeks an answer to the following question above all. What exactly is this government and the Minister for Communications trying to hide? All the Liberals who sit opposite, who were pre-selected on a mantra of small government and accountability, should not be running interference for the spivs and grifters that seek to obfuscate and evade parliamentary scrutiny by refusing to answer questions on notice put to them by the Australian Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kitching. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. Well, this afternoon it is of grave concern to yet again see the lack of accountability of this government in relation to answering questions on notice. I did see Senator Hume come in here and explain that despite the minister's best endeavours, that the Department of Communications has been unable to get NBN Co to answer these questions. Well, I put to you that the troubles in this relationship and the troubles in the lack of accountability and the lack of reporting in outcomes of NBN Co's performance to this parliament goes much, much, much deeper than that. For example, Senator Urquhart asked questions in relation to the forecast in relation to the outstanding amount of debt and equity by financial year 2024. How much in free cash flow does the 2021 corporate plan forecast NBN will generate by financial year 2024? Have these cash flows been committed? If yes, towards what? What was the capex for the fixed wireless network as at 1st of July 2020? How many fixed wireless towers have been built? How many fixed wireless cells have been deployed? Based on the 2021 corporate plan, what is cumulative capex for the fixed wireless out to 2024? Now, these are issues that have been covered in previous corporate plans, but for some reason the government and NBN Co saw fit not to adequately explain this information in their latest corporate plan, and yet we find even still, despite these questions being asked by opposition senators, there are still no answers. The NBN corporate plan was missing information on peak funding from cost blowouts, no update on the NBN debt profile, again a question that was asked by Senator Urquhart, no updated capital expenditure by technology. You know, this is CapEx expenditure It's a fairly basic thing to go in a corporate plan, and yet we cannot even get these questions answered in estimates. No operating expenditure profile. And so the corporate plan shows a complete lack of transparency, and as the Shadow Minister, Michelle Rowland, said, she said it was nothing short of a cover-up designed to conceal unfunded announcements made by Mr Fletcher today. Now, the issue here is that this government keeps trying to assert that it is meeting the milestones and connection milestones, and that it exceeds them and is doing a great job in managing NBN Co to deliver to Australians. So it is little wonder to me that NBN Co, the Department of Communications, are also dragging their feet in answering these questions, because, again, what it exposes is cost blowouts and consumer disappointment when the promises that the government has made are simply not met. I'll take you to some of the questions asked by Senator Green in estimates. Senator Green asked, in relation to the 1.5 million premises being GFAST enabled, one of them said it would be by 2020, and the minister's now saying it's 2023. Senator Green asks, why won't fibre to the curb network be gigabyte capable by the end of 2020? And Mr Windeyer, the key official answering these questions from the Department of Communications, he says, well, there are some details in here worth raising with NBN, or we can take them on notice. I think NBN will be able to answer for you when they appear exactly what the state of the FTTC network is and its readiness. But as we see in the kinds of questions that remain unanswered, it shows that the Department of Communications said, here, let NBN Co answer these questions. We could take it on notice, but best direct your questions over there. Well, perhaps we should have asked both NBN Co and the department some of these questions, because now we've got the department complaining that they can't get NBN Co to answer these questions in a timely manner. Well, what does this show about the accountability of this government in relation to the promises that it has made to the Australian people in relation to its NBN network? It is in an appalling state of affairs. I have been speaking to constituents that have been sold, have responded to marketing where they've signed up to certain megabit levels that simply cannot be met by the current infrastructure that exists in their local area, and that essentially they have been sold. They have been sold something that doesn't exist in their area. And so when Senator Urquhart asks at question 188 how many FTTN premises cannot currently achieve a layer 2 speed of 25 megabits per second, and they haven't answered it, what we're really talking about here is Australian consumers that were sold a dud product where we have a government that refuses to be accountable for the promises that it made. This is an appalling state of affairs, and while I've seen many a government official at estimates complain about the number of questions that Senator Kitching asks, and they tend to kind of go, oh, here we go again. But there is a real relationship between things like executive bonuses, flowers bought, and kind of corporate culture, how much is spent on entertainment and the like. When you relate that back to poor performance and accountability. The promises that are made to the Australian people that this government is essentially responsible for that are not delivered. In 2013, the Coalition promised every Australian that they would have access to minimum speeds of 25 millibytes per second by the end of 2016. They were asked, can NBN Co confirm this target was missed by up to 7 million premises? Now, we're here in 2021 now. You would have thought that somewhere in Minister Fletcher's accountability, or the officers that the Department of Communications has sat with, that they would be tracking. They'd be tracking their promises, and that they would be able to say that the department would be able to answer, that the ministers would be able to answer, and indeed that NBN Co would be able to answer basic questions about the promises that they made in their, as a government, and that they are tracking those outcomes. But again, here you can see in these unanswered questions, we've got on one hand a government that likes to make big promises and pays no attention to the detail of getting it delivered. Not only is it the government not paying attention to detail, but it seemed to me, in the answers given by officials, that they didn't have the technical know-how at a senior level to be able to answer the questions about the milestones that NBN Co should be meeting, in order to meet these commitments. Now, that to me seems like an extraordinary state of affairs. So, Senator Green also asked in estimates. Senator Green said, you don't have the details of the $70 per home that it's going to by the government. And Mr Windeyer said, no, I don't have the technical details that NBN is going to be spending money on over the next few years with respect to the FTTC network. I'll take that on notice, but I think they'll be happy to answer it. I think I have to hand over, but you said this was a significant upgrade, and it's so significant that you don't know what it is. Mr Atkinson from the department says, can we just assist with this? I think what Mr Windeyer is saying, you'll get a better answer from the people who are actually going to be implementing the upgrade on the technical aspects of exactly what's going to happen to the FTTC. And yet we see that we ask technical questions of NBN Co. Senator Hume comes in here and says the department is doing their best to get answers from NBN Co, and yet the department doesn't have the expertise to answer them themselves, which I think they should have. These are major announcements that are embedded in the translation between the announcements that the government has made, the relationship of the department with NBN Co that holds together that accountability to the Australian public. And still, we come in here and Senator Hume says, oh, we're doing our best to get NBN Co to answer these questions. Well, I remind Minister Fletcher and Senator Hume, who was indeed at the table at the time, I remind Senator Hume that it was the department that directed many of these questions to NBN Co, questions that I believe they should have been able to answer. And they are questions, I think, that very much the failure to answer these questions very much underpins the disaster that is now the NBN and data promises that this government has made to the Australian people about the technology that they should be able to have access to at work, at home and in the broader community. I will have to say today that the kinds of issues that are being raised by the opposition in relation to NBN Co's financial year 2020 results. Again, you can see NBN Co and the government trying to self-congratulate themselves about their outcomes, and yet when you dig down into the data, if you can get it through these processes, because the department doesn't seem to be able to ask NBN Co for this accountability, that actually the claims being made don't stand up. So NBN Co, by all reports in their data, showed a great outcome over COVID-19 for completing the volume rollout. But in this parliament, we have a duty to scrutinise the kinds of claims being made, and indeed the technology mix of the multi-technology mix that the government has promoted. The cost blowout from that's gone from $29.5 billion to 41 to 49 and now 51. And yet, the kinds of questions we ask about the corporate plan, which Senator Urquhart has asked, highlighted that the 2020 corporate plan saw significant revision downwards in targets, making it easier to exceed the stated claim and claim credit for having done so. If you compare the 2020 results compared to the unrevised 2019 corporate plan forecasts, capital costs are up $1.5 billion and revenue is down $100 billion. And yet the kinds of questions that Senator Urquhart asked about capital expenditure remain unanswered. It is little surprise to me that NBN Co is dragging its feet in answering these questions, but I find it completely galling that the government pretends it wants to be completely accountable to this parliament and it's some kind of administrative accountability, when we know that these issues go right down to the core of the disaster that is this government's commitments to the Australian people in relation to the NBN.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. I don't believe there's any further questions. I just need to put the question, Senator Gallagher, on this matter. So the question is that the motion as moved by Senator Urquhart to take note be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against, I believe the ayes have it. So are there